Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. For many, particularly his critics, the Trump administration is nothing less than chaos on steroids. For some who know the president, this is merely business as usual for him. Is this a winning strategy for the president, America, and the world? Cross-talking the Trump presidency, I'm joined by my guest, James Jatras, in Washington. He is a former advisor to the U.S. Senate Republican leadership. In Williamsburg, we have Andrew Langer. He is president of the Institute of Liberty, as well as host of the Langercast on Realm Network. And in London, we cross to Inderjeet Palmer. He is a professor of international politics at City University in London. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Jim, let me go to you first in Washington. An article in Politico a couple days ago caught my eye. And it really said a lot to me about the presidency under Donald Trump, good and bad and in between. And the title is, "To America, It Looks Like Chaos. For Trump, It's Just Tuesday." I think that really kind of sums it up, because there is some kind of method to his madness. The left and the Democrats, they don't understand and they don't like it, but there seems to be something to it. We also had, throwing into the mix here, this ban on transgender people in the military, which of course everybody's on fire in liberal media. How intentional is this on his part? Because a lot of people would say it's irrational and it's chaotic, but then there'll be a lot of his supporters say he's just being himself, and that's what we elected. Go ahead, James.
I think part of it is intentional. He announced this thing about the transgenders very soon after the Congress passed this draconian bill about Russia sanctions, which I think we can talk about in more detail. But on this transgender thing, I think he is trolling. I mean, I think he is baiting them. You know, after all, who can forget that classic film, you know, trannies in Iwo Jima, or the fighting trannies of Iwo Jima, or feather boas on Omaha Beach. I mean, it's this idea of this sexual revolution that has to be institutionalized in American society, and it's not just in the military. It's, you know, little kids being pumped full of drugs to change their gender identification when they're still minors. I mean, there's a kind of a craziness in American society that I think Trump is baiting when he does something like this. Not only does he take the attention off of this ongoing campaign against him, Russia, 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 but I think he throws into relief for, let's say, the core of the American people, the people in flyover country, his constituency, just how out of touch with reality his critics are.
You know, Andrew, weigh in on that, because the story that was getting a lot of traction, of course, you know, Russia, Russia, Russia in the background, that's how the fake news channel CNN and MSNBC, they make their money. That's their business model. But the story that was being a lot talked about, and I think was very, very interesting, it was about Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General. And in a flash, well, I should say in a tweet, that story went away. Again, Jim said, trolling. Is Trump trolling the media because he wants to control the narrative? He wants to control what's in the storylines for the major broadcasters and newspapers?
Yeah, I don't necessarily see it as trolling. I do see it as entirely intentional. And yes, it did take the Jeff Sessions story off the front page, but I thought that this was all directed at sort of getting people's attention focused away from the failure of the Obamacare repeal measures in the Senate and sort of the gelded nature of the Trump legislative agenda there. The reality is, yes, the president knows that he can reset the agenda anytime he tweets out something, and something that's very controversial. My sources are telling me that this transgender ban issue was at work for some time, several weeks to at least a month, that sort of inside DOD channels there was chatter that this was coming down the pipeline, and that it was just a matter of picking the right moment to make it known. You know, listen, personally, as someone who's been involved in politics now for almost a quarter of a century, would I rather the president didn't do things this way? Yes. But then again, I've been proven wrong time and again when it comes to this presidency and the impact of what he does and how it plays with the American people. So it's one of those things where, yes, he is out there. He is trying to reset and control the narrative that's out there. I don't think it's trolling per se. I just think it is a matter of sort of setting the stories of the day.
Can you weigh in on that? Because, one can make the argument that what comes out of the White House is chaos. It's either it's not stable. This person may be leaving. There's always a rumor that someone's going to leave, like Reince Priebus or something. Then we hear the rumor that the Secretary of State Tillerson might leave. But on the other side of the coin is that this is the kind of behavior that got Trump elected unexpectedly. I think all of us would agree. So if it worked during the campaign, it should work now, or maybe a campaign and a presidency are two different things and should remain two different things. Go ahead in London.
Well, I think there clearly is a personal style at work which runs right through the campaign, but also runs through the presidency as well. But I think one or two of your other guests raised the issue, which is this is a part of if you like, a particular logic, and that logic largely seems to revolve around the media narrative and the kind of debates and issues that come up there, which then keeps everybody very busy analysing what he's just tweeted or said. But I think it also is playing to a kind of voter base as well.
Yeah.
And I think now the issue is that this is where the differentiation has to come between the campaign and the presidency. Now is the time when more and more people are looking to the president to lead and to act, because you will recall the 2016 campaign was one about the way in which the system of government was broken, that the American dream was out of reach of more and more people. People were basically screaming for change. And quite frankly now, I think there are more secular Trump supporters who are beginning to question whether this president is actually capable of achieving anything. So Trump can set a particular kind of narrative, but unfortunately he seems to be playing the game which was the one that he criticized during his campaign, which got him into the White House. It may not work too much longer for large parts of his support base.
Peter, if I can just jump in here real quick.
Go ahead. Jump in. Go ahead.
Peter, if I could, because there's an ancillary impact to all of this, which is to say that as the president does these things and as he sort of antagonizes some of the folks up on Capitol Hill, there's a real fundamental issue here in terms of the Trump agenda, which is, and the White House just released a report yesterday about nominees being slow-walked in the Senate. If you alienate the legislative branch and the legislative branch retaliates by not approving your nominees, it becomes very difficult to implement the Trump executive branch agenda then. And it's part of the reason why the Obamacare vote failed was because there wasn't a decent team pressing the issue in legislative affairs from the Department of Health and Human Services. But all of these other agenda items the president has, which would by virtue of precedent and the way the government works, go through the executive branch, they're all at risk if these nominees don't get approved.
Okay. James, let me go back to you in Washington. I think it's really interesting here is that the left has always, or at least in the last 30 years or so, used the identity politics card to keep in power. And you know what? Just in what we just heard from Indrajit and Andrew, Trump, some of his worst enemies are the Republican Party. Unfortunately, that's true for this president here. And so I think it's really quite interesting is how Trump has flipped this identity politics card to his own advantage, because, all the liberals in Hollywood and all the liberals in New York and Washington are up in arms about this transgender thing, but the flyover states probably aren't. And he's speaking to his base, and he's using his instrument of communication, Twitter. I think this is a very calculated move. And again, he wins on so many different counts here. Of course, he's not going to make people in Hollywood and New York and Washington love him. They never will love him, so why should he care what they think? Go ahead.
I think you're exactly right. I'm actually a fan of his Twitter. He's giving great speeches around the country like he did during the campaign. But, at some point people say, well, that's a great speech. Hey, this guy ought to be president. Oh, wait a minute. He is. And I would turn Andrew's comment around. I don't think his style or his tweets are what's antagonizing the Republicans on Capitol Hill. The fact of the matter is a large chunk of the Republican Party didn't want him. They agree more with the Democrats than they do with Trump's populist agenda, whether it's on foreign policy, trade, immigration, and a number of other things. They're slow walking this because A, they're incompetent, and B, they don't like Trump very much, not because they're offended by his tweets. They don't like his constituency. And the proof of that is that while they're slow walking his nominees, while they're not getting Obamacare repealed, they're not getting tax reform done, they're not doing anything they're supposed to do, they find plenty of time to join hands with the Democrats who are engineering a soft coup against Trump to pass this Russia sanctions bill that guarantees for a generation a new Cold War and strips the president of his fundamental power to make America's foreign policy.
Well, Judy, let me go back to you in London. I mean, it is very interesting here is that with the new Russian sanction bill, it handcuffs him. He now, if he signs it, he's going to be basically signing, he'll be putting himself in a little jail cell, at least on the issue of Russia, because he has to get permission from congressional committees to make some changes. That is really unprecedented that the executive that controls foreign policy would surrender those powers to the Congress. Go ahead in London.
Well, I think that's an important point, but I think we have to bear in mind that although President Trump and candidate Trump's words and some speeches and rhetoric were about resetting relations with Russia and becoming more kind of maybe warmer or whatever, the key issue is that since his election, NATO has continued to deploy forces into the Baltic states.
Thank you.
It has continued effectively to pursue a policy which actually is actually much more anti-Russian and continues with the past. And Nikki Haley, UN ambassador, has kept on about sanctions. No sanctions have been changed or removed. And so what I would say is this is actually, I'm not sure that he's put in a prison cell. I think he's been pretty much applying the sanctions already. This just suggests that the Congress wants to tie him up a little bit in case there should be any room for maneuver. So I'm not sure he goes much against what he's already been doing. And I think to some extent, the kind of political theatre which goes on is actually drawing attention away from that. And
that's a good point.
I am not sure that I really see that much change, really.
Okay, gentlemen, I'm going to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on the Trump presidency. Stay with RT. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter LaBelle. To remind you, we're discussing the Trump presidency. Okay, Jim, let me go back to you in Washington. One thing that I want to go back to Jeff Sessions, because I was insulted by Trump's behavior towards the Attorney General. And it seems to me that Jeff Sessions was a Trumpist before Trump knew he was a Trumpist, okay? And treating your close political ally, the guy that came out for you first in the Senate when nobody would even get close to Trump, and to treat him this way in public, I think is unconscionable. If you have an issue with your AG, you should talk to him personally about it and not be airing it like he has. I mean, Jeff Sessions is a very polarizing figure. I like him very much. I have an enormous amount of respect for him. His entire time in the Senate, I think, is commendable. And to see him treated this way, I think, was absolutely wrong. And maybe this is, again, maybe this transgender ban thing, goes out there, and Trump knew everybody was going to go, just go crazy about it, which they have. It has changed the story. But I really hope that Trump is going to say something public, because since he has been so public about Jeff Sessions, that he should make amends. That would be, because he's talked a lot about loyalty. Does he have loyalty to his people? And a lot of people are going to be asking that question right now. Go ahead.
I agree with that 100%. I don't think these criticisms of Mr. Sessions should have been public. I have been an admirer of Jeff Sessions. That said, I do think it was a mistake for him to recuse himself. I think that just opened the door to this endless probe by Bob Mueller that's going to drag into next year and be used essentially as a way to bring down the administration. And also, the very first day he walked into office, he should have set up a task force to seek out leakers and indict them and throw them in jail. Where's the secretly impaneled grand jury handing down indictments? As far as I know, it's not happening, or else that would have been leaked. Instead, he's out giving speeches talking about Nancy Reagan just say no to drugs and stepping up civil forfeitures. Those are not the things that should be at the top of his agenda. So if these criticisms, which I don't think should be done publicly, can focus him on what the president's agenda are and start putting some of these deep state leakers in jail, that would be a good start.
Andrew, the whole issue of loyalty and not in the oh lordy way of that Jim Comey, I thought that was just absolutely clownish of him in front of Congress. But you know, the biggest problem that Trump has, actually, outside of members of his own party that won't support him, slow walk everything, which, again, is unconscionable. The American people spoke. But, you know, his dealing with how to move his agenda forward while, you know, you have all these people that are leaking behind him. I mean, in his own White House. This is his real problem here. And he better address that. And he should have addressed it weeks and weeks and weeks ago. I think that it's been estimated there have been more leaks from the deep state than in the last 6 months than the last 8 years during Obama. And that's really kind of interesting because a lot of leaks did come out. Go ahead, Andrew.
Well, that is certainly one of the issues that we've been tracking, which is this issue of the deep state. But I want to go back to this issue of the sort of the public dressing down of Jeff Sessions.
Okay.
Because I think there's a greater point that's being missed here. And to sort of go back to what you guys were talking about earlier in terms of the new way of doing things. You know, Trump, I think it's fairly clear, you know, at least to me, that the agenda here is to get Jeff Sessions to step down so that a new attorney general can be appointed, an attorney general who wouldn't have to recuse himself from the Russia investigation or herself from the Russia investigation, and thereby that attorney general could fire Bob Mueller, and you sort of, we wouldn't have the special investigator problem. The issue, of course, being that if the president wants to get the attorney general to either resign or, in fact, the attorney general gets fired, that needs to be done in a very, very public fashion, and the president needs to lay out in a very public fashion the reasons why he is concerned with his attorney general. I know, you know, the old way of doing things was to make sure that stuff was done behind closed doors. It's certainly the gentlemanly way of doing things. It certainly doesn't help with this perception that the administration is in chaos. And it certainly doesn't help if you want to make sure that your other cabinet officials are you know, staying in line or working with you. But on the other hand, the upside is making sure that there is a very open and transparent record of the president's dissatisfaction with the attorney general.
Yeah.
So that's at least the way I've been.
Go ahead.
Let me jump in, Peter.
Go ahead, jump in.
Yeah, Andrew. Yeah, I understand that. I don't think it's the gentlemanly thing to do. I can understand maybe he wants Mr. Sessions to go, but I don't see how he gets a new attorney general past the Senate that is not going to be able to recuse himself and is going to be able to fire Mueller. He'll have to swear on a stack of bishops during his confirmation process that he won't do that. He'll have a worse situation than he has with Sessions right now.
Okay, Energy, let me go to you in London. James just said what I was about to say to you. I mean, first of all, the next attorney general, everyone's going to assume that he's going to have to fire the special counsel. That's going to be electric, okay? Also, anyone that comes in now can expect to be publicly criticized by the president. Who wants that? Who wants to be treated that way? But particularly someone of a distinguished politician as Jeff Sessions. I mean, you don't get more distinguished than that. So who wants to step into those shoes? And whoever steps in those shoes are going to be expected to file the special counsel. The horse is already out of the gate. Trump is going to have to deal with this. The special counsel is there. He claims that he did nothing wrong. His surrogates did nothing wrong. We're going to have to let it go through. We don't have any other choices. And if he tries to push it, then people are going to say obstruction. Go ahead, Indrajit in London.
Well, I think President Trump has made his bed.
Yep.
I think there are lots of forces which want to destabilize him. That is no question. There's very few people in the political establishment who wanted the candidacy to succeed for Donald Trump. But I think President Trump also has not helped himself very much. His anarchic style is a very personal kind of style as well. He demands personal loyalty but does not often offer it very easily to others. If you look at General Mattis, his National Security Advisor, Rex Tillerson, his Secretary of State, he has let them down on many occasions. He's got an autocratic style, which is all right if you're running a big corporation because you own the corporation, as he did. But the thing is, this is not a private government. This is the government of the United States, and he's the president of the United States. That requires a very different way of behaving, both publicly and privately, with your colleagues and outside. And I think he has basically undermined himself. And anyone who now accepts a senior position in his administration has got to have realized that effectively you are a servant of President Trump. You are not to really exercise your own judgment unless he says you can. And I think he's going to find it very difficult to see anybody of integrity accepting such a senior position from now on.
You know, it's very interesting. I want to say to all of you, when you had the Obama administration, the most secretive in American history, the Trump administration is by far the most transparent, but for very odd reasons. Okay, I want to.
Yeah.
We already had mentioned here a palace coup, and the Aspen Security Forum, the former Obama CEI director John Brennan. Was talking about the possibility if the special counsel were to be fired. And he said this, and I think it's very interesting. I think it's an obligation of some executive branch officers to refuse to carry that order out. I would just hope that this would not be going to be a partisan issue, that Republicans, Democrats are going to see that the future of this government is at stake and something needs to be done for the good of the future. He's calling for a coup. Jim, he's calling for a palace coup. He's saying that it should be a bipartisan coup against the President of the United States. He said this. It doesn't get coverage at CNN or at MSNBC. He said this at that Aspen conference. Go ahead.
That's absolutely correct. And this is where I would disagree with our colleague in London. You know, John McCain on the floor of the Senate the other day said, we are not the president's servants. We are a co-equal branch of government. That's absolutely true. But constitutionally, the executive branch consists of one man. That constitutionally, the executive inferior officers, as the Constitution calls them, are servants of the president, not to him personally, not to Donald Trump personally, but to the president and to his policy direction. For them to actively seek to undermine his policy direction is unacceptable under any circumstances. I think part of the problem is that, at least on foreign policy, some of the people he has appointed in national security and so forth are people who do not agree with anything he said during the campaign, and I think he does find himself somewhat boxed in by people that he has himself put in place.
You know, but you know, again, going back to Jeff Sessions here. I mean, I agree with what Jim just said there. I mean, he's appointed people that are not on the same page with him, but the only guy that really was on the same page with him was his Attorney General. Again, you know, I am flabbergasted by this. Okay, I mean, can you explain it? Because it seems to me that it's maybe already been resolved privately because Jeff Sessions is still there. Okay, maybe the Sessions moment has passed. Maybe they've patched things up somehow. I don't know. Or maybe what Trump is wanting, he wants more investigations into Hillary Clinton, the Clinton Foundation, the emails, Ukraine, and maybe the president is right and giving Sessions some direction. You know, if I'm going to feel the heat, then everybody else in this whole town is going to feel the heat with me. Go ahead, Andrew.
Well, that's exactly right. And the fact is that Jeff Sessions was focusing on things that the president did not want the Attorney General and the Department of Justice to focus on. Nobody asked for civil asset forfeiture to be revived. Nobody asked for Jeff Sessions to sort of pick up and go and do a war on state-based marijuana industries. I mean, this is not what the DOJ should have been doing according to this administration's agenda. So the president goes and engages in this very public dressing down. And I was always under the impression there was some behind-the-scenes conversation. But I do want to just take a step back, Peter, for a second. And I want to talk about this issue of the deep state. Because you've got folks in the deep state who have made very public rumblings over the last 8 months, since long before even long before Donald Trump took office, that this was coming to a head. John Schindler, the former DIA official, former professor at the Naval War College, has tweeted out almost incessantly and had blogged almost incessantly about taking down the Trump administration. And the thing about John Schindler is when you hear these issues of unidentified intelligence, former intelligence officials, almost certainly that these are the rumblings of John Schindler, who has a vendetta against the Russian intelligence services for forcing him out of his job at the Naval War College. And so this is you know, a deep state that is very antagonistic towards this president.
Okay, well, we only have a few seconds left here. What I think is very, very interesting is that Trump really needs to step back and see what's most important for his agenda to get passed. I like his style sometimes, but sometimes I get the impression that it really is in spite of his behavior to move his agenda forward. All right, gentlemen, we've run out of time. Many thanks to my guests in Washington, Williamsburg, and in London. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, crosstalk rules.